Hey everyone, welcome back. So we are in part 2, endocrine system. We will discuss about hormone types, actions, and control of secretions. So hormone types, so based on the chemistry, there are two types of hormone. The first one is called the steroid hormones. And these steroid hormones are actually lipid soluble hormone. So they are solubles in lipids. And the second one is called the non-steroid hormones. They are also known as water-soluble hormones. So the steroid hormones, they are steroid, so lipid-soluble hormones. So they containing lipids, okay, complex rings with carbons and hydrogen atoms. All steroid hormones are produced from cholesterol. So cholesterol is actually important molecules to make several steroid hormones. Examples of steroid hormones are sex hormone like testosterone, estrogen, progesterone, and also adrenal cortex hormones like cortisol, aldosterone, and also androgens. The non-steroid hormone, this is water-soluble hormones, they are made from proteins, amino acid, okay, polypeptides, which is actually, all of these three is actually protein types, okay, and then also combination between glyco and proteins. It's called the glycoproteins, combination between carbohydrates and the proteins. Examples, okay, peptide hormones like ADH, antidiuretic hormone, oxytocin. The protein hormones, examples is growth hormones. The amino acid hormone or amines hormones, example epinephrine, norepinephrine, thyroxine. The example of glycoproteins is TSH. Okay, this is thyroid stimulating hormone. Again, two main type of hormone based on chemical. The first one, water-soluble hormone. They are consist of amino acid, peptide, proteins, glycoproteins. And this is examples of this hormone. The one that made of amino acid, norepinephrine, epinephrine, thyroxine. The one that made of peptide, ADH, okay, antidiuretic hormones, OT, oxytocin, TRH, thyroid releasing hormone, SS, somatostatin, and GnRH, gonadotropic releasing hormone. So one that made of proteins, example is PTH, parathyroid hormone, growth hormone. The one that made of glycoproteins, FSH, follicle stimulating hormone, LH, luteinizing hormone, TSH, thyroid stimulating hormones. And the second one is lipid soluble hormone, which is steroid hormone. They are made of cholesterol. Example, estrogen, testosterone, aldosterone, cortisol, androgens. So these are the two main type of hormone. Now, when we compare the steroid hormones, lipid soluble hormones, and water soluble hormones, there are several characteristics that different. The transportations in the bloodstream, remember, mostly hormones will be transported in the blood. For the steroids or lipid soluble hormones, remember they are not soluble in water. Blood is actually consists of water, which is plasma. Therefore, for lipid-soluble hormone, they require proteins, okay, to carry them. So this lipid-soluble hormone or steroids will be binding to proteins. And the complex of these proteins, the hormone, is called the lipoproteins. And then for the water-soluble hormone or non-steroid hormones, they are solubles in water. Therefore, they will be freely circulates in the blood. So they do not require protein transport. And then diffusion to the target cell. Remember lipid-soluble hormones, because they are lipid, they will be easily crossing the target cell. So they will be able to cross the target cell. They will enter into the cytoplasm, and even they will also enter into the nucleus. Okay, that's for the steroid or lipid-soluble hormone. For the non-steroid hormone or water-soluble hormones, they will not be able to cross the plasma membrane, so they will be stay outside the cell, okay, outside the target cell. Receptor, okay, remember, because the lipid-soluble hormone or steroid hormone able to cross the cell membranes, therefore the receptor for these hormones will be located inside the cell. And most of them is actually located inside the nucleus on the DNA. So the receptor is actually located on the DNA of the target cell. This is for the steroids or lipid-soluble hormone. For the non-steroid or water-soluble hormones, because they are unable to enter into the cell, therefore the receptor will be located outside the cell, which is on the cell membrane. Okay, it is outside the cell, okay, because the hormones cannot enter into the cell. So the receptor will be outside the cell, okay, on the plasma membrane. The action, okay, it is very logical because the receptor is located on the DNA for this steroid hormone. Therefore, the action will be alteration of gene. So it will altering the gene. Just remember, example of steroid hormones are sexual hormone. So this sex hormone, for example, estrogen, will alter the gene, which is they will control the characteristic of female, characteristic. If this estrogen, for example, enter into the male's body, and what happened? It will alter the gene of male, become a little bit like a female, okay? Because the action of lipid-soluble hormones are altering the gene. Okay, so they alter the gene. For the non-steroid hormones or water-soluble hormones, the action mostly in the plasma membrane, which is they will activate the metabolic process in the cytoplasms. And remember, they are unable to enter into the cytoplasms. These hormones, okay, is also known as the first messenger. So the hormone is become the first messenger over here. It will bind to receptor and will activate the second messenger inside the cytoplasm. And this second messenger will activate the protein kinase. And this protein kinase, the one that will change the metabolic process inside the cell. So the process that coming from the first messenger go to the second messenger and then activation of protein kinase is called the signal transduction. Okay, so the water-soluble hormone will alter the metabolic process by what we call the signal transductions. So these are the differences between lipid-soluble hormone and water-soluble hormone. Now, hormone actions. We already mentioned a little bit about this action. Like, for example, lipid-soluble hormone altering the gene. The water-soluble hormones, they alter the metabolic process inside the cytoplasms. Okay. So hormones, just remember, they are released into the extracellular fluid. Then it will be entering the bloodstream. Okay, so if it is lipid-soluble hormone, they require transport protein, is called the lipoprotein. If it is water-soluble hormone, they do not require the transport protein. So the way they are transported is based on whether they are lipid-soluble or water-soluble hormone. And hormones are very powerful in low concentration. So we only require very low concentration of hormone to change the process inside the cell. Again, they mostly altering the metabolic process, like, for example, altering the enzyme activities, change the membrane transport. So there are many processes that can be affected by the hormones. And then the number receptor, okay, number of receptor on the target cell will determine the strength of the response. And this number of receptor can be changed based on hormones that go to the target cell. For example, okay, if the hormones that coming to the target cell is very few, then the target cell will produce more receptor. And this process is called the upregulation. If the hormone is very few, then the target cell will produce more receptor. And this process is called the upregulation. If the hormone that are produced are so many, so increase the hormones level, then the target cell will produce less receptor. So the number of receptor will decrease. And this is what we call the down regulations. So the target cell can regulate whether up regulation or down regulation. Up regulation means increase the number of receptor due to the few number of hormones that is released by the endocrine glands. Down regulation means decrease the number of receptor due to increase of hormones produced by the endocrine gland. Okay, for examples, okay, if we eat too much glucose or sugar, okay, what happens? Our pancreas will produce so many insulin. The insulin will go to the liver. Liver is actually the target cell for the insulin. Because there are so many insulins, the liver cell will decrease, okay, the number of receptor. Because so many insulin over there. If it is happening for a long time, okay, long term, then what happens? The sensitivity of the liver cell to receive the insulin will be less. Okay, so mostly this person will develop what we call the diabetes type 2, okay, type 2 diabetes, which is less sensitivity to the insulin due to too much insulin produced for long-term period. Okay, that's the example of down regulation. Okay, now if we look at the steroid hormone, okay, lipid-soluble hormones, okay, so they are lipid-soluble, therefore they are not solubles in water. They will be transported through the blood by binding to the transport proteins, and they can diffuse the cell membrane easily. It will enter into the cell, and even they will enter into the nucleus of the cell. And the receptor will be inside the cell, and mostly in the nucleus, which is on the DNA. Because receptor is on DNA, then the action will be altering the gene. So the gene will be altered by these lipid-soluble hormones. So just remember, most of lipid-soluble hormones are sexual hormones. So when these sex hormones enter into different gender, for example, it will alter the characteristics of that gender. Like, for example, if estrogens enter into the male individual, this male will change the characteristic a little bit. Now, the sequence of lipid-soluble hormone or steroid hormone. Again, the endocrine gland will secrete that hormone, let's say estrogens, released by the ovary, so the endocrine gland, the ovary. And then the blood will carry that hormones by binding to the transport proteins. And then these hormones will be released into the target cell, and then it will diffuse to the target cell, enter the membrane, enter the cytoplasm, and even enter the nucleus. Hormone will combine with the receptors on the nucleus, mostly on the DNA, and then it will alter the DNA. So DNA will transcribe into messenger RNA. The messenger RNA then will be translated into protein. So this is a protein synthesis. And the new protein synthesis then will produce the actions on that specific individual or that cell. Okay, so this the sequence of lipid-soluble hormone from production until the actions here. If we use the diagrams, so these hormones, produced by the endocrine glands, it will be carried by the transport proteins in the blood. It will be released into the target cell, and it will enter. It will cross the cell membrane, enter the cytoplasm, even is actually entering inside the nucleus. It will bind to the receptor in the nucleus, and this binding actually will make a complex with the DNA. And because of this, the DNA will produce or translate it into messenger RNA. The messenger RNA will be out from the cell into the cytoplasm, bind to the ribosome, and ribosome will translate this messenger RNA into proteins. And this protein that will give or produce the actions into this cell. Okay, so this is the action of lipid-soluble hormone. For the water-soluble hormone or non-steroid hormones, they will be freely transported by the blood. When it is released into the target cell, they will not be able to enter into the cell. So they cannot penetrate the cell membrane. Therefore, the receptor will be outside. So they will bind to the receptor outside the cell. And this hormone that binds to the receptor is considered as the first messenger. And then this binding of first messenger or hormones with the receptor will cause the production of the second messenger. Mostly the second messenger is the CAMP, cyclic monophosphate, adenosine monophosphate, and this is acting as the second messenger. And this second messenger then will activate the proteins inside the cytoplasm. It's called the protein kinase. And the whole process over here from outside, from the first messenger into the second messenger, and then the protein kinase is called the signal transduction. So just remember, for water-soluble hormone, they require the second messenger over here, because the first messenger unable to enter into the cell to change the cell or to produce the action. So they require the second messenger. The sequence of this water-soluble hormone. First, the endocrine gland produce the hormone. Let's say pancreas produce the insulin. So insulin is water-soluble hormone. And then the blood will carry that insulin or that hormones. And it's going to be freely. Okay, there is no proteins, transport proteins required for this water-soluble hormone. And then it will be released into the target cell. It will combine with the receptor that is located outside, which is on the cell membrane. And then it will activate the G proteins, and this activation will produce the cyclic AMP, which is this is considered as a second messenger. Okay. And remember, this hormone itself is considered as the first messenger. Okay, so the first messenger combined with the receptor, activate the G protein, it will produce the second messenger. And the second messenger will activate the protein kinase. And protein kinase will activate the proteins to change the metabolic process inside the cell. And then the action will changing, it produce that effects because of this change in the metabolic process. So there is no gene alteration over here. So for male and female, insulins will have the same effects because it is not altering the gene. So water-soluble hormone do not alter the gene. However, if it is lipid-soluble hormones like estrogen, for example, the action between male and female will be different. Okay, so estrogen in the female will control the female characteristic. If it is entered into the male cell, then the male cell will change the gene, altering the male gene into a female characteristic. Okay, if we use this diagram, then let's say this is hormone released by the endocrine glands. It will be transported by the blood, released into the target cell. And this hormone, because unable to enter into the cell, the receptor will be located on the cell membrane. When the hormone, and this hormone is considered as the first messenger. Okay, this first messenger bind to the receptor. Okay, bind to the receptor. It will activate the G proteins, and then the G protein activate, it will change the ATP into the CEMP. Okay, so this CAM is become the second messenger. Okay, and this second messenger is actually the one that activates the protein kinase. Inactive become active. And this active protein kinase then will make cellular changes. Okay, there will be changes over here. Let's say this is insulin, bind to G proteins, produce the second messenger, and then activate the protein kinase. If it is in the liver cell, then what happened? This protein kinase will be able to make, okay, so let's say this is glucose, many glucose will be bind together to produce glycogen. inside the liver cell. And remember, insulin function is to reduce the sugar in the blood by combining them together to make the glycogen. And this process is done by this protein kinase. And for male and female, the process will be the same because this is the non-steroid or water-soluble hormone. Now, some clinical application. Okay, some people actually abuse the hormones. So they use hormone for a shortcut. For example, there are many people, especially athletes, they use steroids to increase their muscle strength, muscle size, and muscle strength. So the steroid is used or abused for doing this action. And it actually can have many harmful effects, like, for example, decrease the natural testosterone production. So for male, it can cause sterility, stunting growth, breast development in male, the male sexual characteristic in female. Remember, this is sexual hormone. If female use this steroid, then the female might change their characteristic. So this female might grow their facial hair, mustache, for example, change their voice. It's become, it has a male voice type. Damage to the kidney, liver, or the heart, increase the LDL, okay, low density lipoprotein cholesterol, and some psychiatric problem. So this is clinical application for this steroid. And then growth hormone, for example. Growth hormone can be also abused. For example, is used for growing muscle. And mostly they are also used along with the steroids. Okay, so growth hormone steroids, they are both used for enlarging the muscles. Erythropoietin, this is the hormones that is produced by the kidney to increase red blood cell production. So, you know, some people can abuse it and put it inside their body in order to increase more red blood cell. It means that it will increase the oxygen delivery. So for some athletes, this is important to increase the oxygen level on their cell. So they use this as a shortcut to increase the oxygen level. They can also use for treating some anemia. Okay? And again, for abuse by the athlete, it can be used to improve the performance, okay, by increasing the oxygen level. But it is dangerous because it can cause the heart attack and even death. Now we go to the control of hormone secretion. So hormone secretions and effects. Secretion precisely regulated. So the hormones will be regulated when it is going to be produced and how much, for example, and primarily controlled by negative feedback system. Right? So let's say about 90% hormone production is controlled by this negative feedback system. The rest maybe with positive feedback system. Okay, so again, mostly with negative feedback system. Effect can be short-lived or even less longer. Some are excreted in the urine after exerting their effects, can be broken down into enzyme, mainly from liver, to stop their effect. So the secretion is regulated, and also the breakdown of this hormone is also regulated inside our body. Now, the one that controls the secretions, mostly negative feedback system. So this system is actually control the hormone production. If the level is rising, then the hormone production will be reduced. So if the response, the effect is increasing, then the response will be decreasing that hormone. If the effect is actually decreased, then the response will be increased. Okay, so if it is increased, then the response will be decreased. If the effect is decreased, then the response will be increased. There is always opposite. Okay, the response will oppose the stimulus. Okay, there are three methods of negative feedback system. The first one using the hypothalamus. So hypothalamus produce many hormones that control whether the other hormone will be increased or decreased. Okay, so using the hypothalamus to control the production of several types of hormones. Using the nervous system controls, okay, so the nervous system will increase or decrease the hormone production based on the stimulus, and also the change of compositions in the internal environment. Okay, like for example, when the insulin level is increased, then pancreas will decrease the insulin production right away. So this is negative feedback system. The second control is positive feedback system. This is rare, but it is used mostly for reproductive system. Okay. Like for example, when during the labor, okay, so the uterine wall contractions increase, and this increased contractions will let the production of oxytocin that will increase more contractions until the baby born. So this is positive feedback system. Okay? So the response actually increase the stimulus. Okay, so this is the negative feedback system, how it look like. So this is normal level over here. Okay, so this is normal level. Let's say if the stimulus increase, okay, so then the control system will tell to decrease the production of the hormone. So the stimulus increase, then the response will try to decrease it. Therefore, it will be on the normal level over here. The same thing if the stimulus too low or there are too little hormones, then the control center will tell the endocrine gland to increase the number of hormones. So when the stimulus decrease, the response will be increased in order to stay in the normal level over here. So this is what we call the negative feedback system. The response, okay, over here will always oppose the stimulus. Okay, if the stimulus increase, the response decrease. If the stimulus decrease, then the response will increase. So this is negative feedback system, which is a kind of normal feedback system. The second feedback system is the positive feedback system. This is rare. The famous example is during labor. So when the baby is ready to, when the mother is ready to give birth, then the uterus, okay, the uterus will be contracted. Okay? So this is stimulus, which is increased contraction. Okay? So the uterine wall contraction will be increased. And then the stimulus will go to the control center, which is the brain, and the brain will tell the hypothalamus to produce the oxytocin. The oxytocin will go to the uterine wall to increase more. So the response is actually adding the stimulus. So the stimulus increase, the response then increase it more until the baby born over here. So this is the positive feedback system. If the stimulus decrease, for example, then the response will be decreasing more. So this is also positive feedback system. So the response will always adding the stimulus. I think that's all for this part 2 of endocrine system. I will see you with the part 3. Goodbye now.